on the church app. All right, well, this morning, we actually had the privilege of being able to hear from a special guest speaker, Pastor Philip Pattison. Again, if you guys have been at BMC for a number of years now, you know that Philip is no stranger to our church. He's actually someone that we've had the privilege of calling a friend, as well as a co-laborer in gospel ministry for a number of years now. Philip is the co-founder and executive director of Foster the City, which is a coalition of over 300 different churches across the Bay Area, Southern California, as well as Nevada, that is engaged in the work of foster care. In addition to his day job advocating for foster families and youth, Philip is a foster and adoptive dad himself, and he and his family of 6 live here in the Bay Area. As I mentioned a little bit ago, BMC's partnership with Foster the City dates all the way back to 2018. That's actually when Philip first came to our church to preach. In fact, it was back when we were still meeting in the cafeteria, and so he came in here and he noticed that we're in a different space now, and praise God that the Lord has been growing our church, and so we're really thankful for that. But ever since he came to preach for us a number of years ago, we've been able to link up with Foster the City multiple times to support the very important work that they do. So before I invite Philip to come up and share, I just also wanted to briefly mention, you might have saw this on the announcements, that anyone who's curious about learning more about Foster the City, about the work that they do after today, whether it's becoming a foster parent yourself or prayerfully supporting a foster family, or just learning more about what's entailed in the foster care system, there's actually going to be an interest meeting with our Mercy team on Sunday, October 13th. And so you guys can circle that date on your calendar. All life stages are welcome. You don't have to be a parent. You don't have to even be married. There is room and opportunity for everyone to kind of pitch in and contribute as it relates to this work. The deadline to sign up is October 10th. We are going to be providing lunch that day, so that gives you a little added incentive to join us. But again, we want to ask you guys to register beforehand so that we can take an accurate head count for food and childcare. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and contact Shirley. Also, I think Pastor Phillips is planning to stick around after service for a little bit just to answer any questions that you guys have and mingle with some of you guys. But without further ado, please join me as we give a very warm BMC welcome to Pastor Philip.
Hey, good morning. Good morning. Did I check? Give me 1 second, guys. Sorry.
That's my fault. I should have turned on the mic before. All right.
Oh, we're good?
Okay.
Check. All right. Here we go. Hey, good morning, Berean. I have really been looking forward to this morning. Thank you so much for having me. What a gift it is for me to be able to be here, to be able to worship with you and to share for a little bit. As Pastor Aaron said, my name is Philip. I lead Foster the City. About 9 years ago, we actually started, rallying churches, linking arms with churches like Berean, churches that just deeply care for vulnerable children in our community, kids and families in crisis, and it has been such a gift over the years to see what started with just a small handful of churches, as Aaron said, now reach over 300 churches, and together, guys, we've seen over 800 children welcomed into safe and loving homes, and you've been a part of that. And I want to honor those of you who have played a role. Maybe you've been a foster parent or a support friend for a foster parent. Maybe you've been praying, maybe you've been giving here to Berean. Berean Mission has been, and Pastor Aaron doesn't know I'm going to say this, but you guys have been incredibly generous to the movement of Foster the City. Everything that we do, we give away for free to churches, to families, and that's all possible because there are churches like Berean Mission that just care deeply for this and are just saying, hey, we want to invest in stuff like this. And so as you're giving here to Berean Mission, your generosity is directly linked to the lives of vulnerable kids in San Mateo County and across the Bay Area. So I want to honor you for that. Can I let you behind the scenes a little bit, though? 9 years ago, when we started this thing, for like 3 days, 4 days maybe, I thought, this is a little embarrassing, I thought that we were the first ones to come up with something like this. I thought we were pioneers. I thought we were innovators. Nobody's ever done something like this, and we were pretty excited. And then I went on Google. And then I realized, maybe we weren't the first. In fact, I realized that over the last 10, 15 years or so, there are movements like Foster the City that are springing up all over the country. Like churches linking arms together, moving towards kids and families in crisis. It's happening in Oklahoma, in Arkansas, in Florida, parts of Texas, Colorado, up in Washington. Like it's happening all over the country. So that did a couple things to me when I realized that 4 days in. Number one, it humbled me a little bit. I'm not quite as innovative as I thought I was. But number two, it lit me up. Because what I began to realize is, it seems as if the Holy Spirit is doing something in the American church. Like the Spirit is like reawakening the church to God's heart for the vulnerable. And how cool is it that we get to be a part of that? If the Holy Spirit is doing something in the American church, we get to be a part, like we get to be a piece of the puzzle right here in the Bay Area. I think that's incredible. So no, we were not the pioneers. That said, there was a pioneer. Can I tell you about him? This is him here. A picture. That's him here. That's Bishop Aaron Blake. Bishop Aaron Blake was a pastor of a tiny little congregation in Brownwood, Texas, in Brown County. And Bishop Blake, he was bivocational, so he had two jobs. He was the pastor of this little congregation. He was also an at-risk counselor at the local high school. And he was the kind of counselor that would have kids come in and out of his office all throughout the day, just needing to talk. One of those kids was a boy named Melvin Johnson. Melvin Johnson was on the high school football team. He was also in the foster care system. And one day, Melvin walked into Bishop Blake's office, tears streaming down his face, and sat down and just started to tell Bishop Blake about how he was experiencing what they call another failed placement, which basically just means he was getting bumped from one house to another yet again. That had happened many times over in his young life. And it was just tears streaming down his face. And Bishop Blake knew nothing about foster care. So he just said, I'm so sorry, Melvin. Melvin, I'm so sorry. Didn't know what to say. Melvin, you're such a great kid. Man, anybody would be lucky to have you. I'd take you in if I could. You're such a great kid. I'm so sorry. And Melvin said, wait, you would take in a kid like me? And Bishop Blake said, of course I would. You're such a great kid. I'm so sorry this is happening. And so Melvin kind of wiped the tears from his face, and he went on with his day. Do you know where this is going? Do we know? Okay. Not long after this, Bishop Blake got a phone call from a social worker. And the social worker said, Bishop Aaron Blake, I'm here with Melvin Johnson, and he said that you said that you want him to come with you, come live with you. And Bishop Blake on the other end just kind of stuttered and stammered. He's like, well, I'm going to need to talk to my wife about that. And so he goes home, and he talks to his wife, Mary, and he tells Mary the story. He says, remember that boy Melvin from school? And he tells Mary what the social worker asked. Then he kind of hesitated with kind of bated breath to hear what Mary would say. You know what she said? She said, Aaron, I sure hope you told them yes. I love that. She said, I sure hope you told them yes. And so they fast-tracked their licensing process, and they welcomed Melvin into their home. Not long after that, the tight end from the football team lost a placement, and Melvin said, hey, it's okay, come live with me and the Blakes. So they brought in the tight end. And then the defensive back needed a placement. And then the fullback needed a placement. And then the other fullback needed a placement. They ended up with 6 teenage boys in their home. 6 high school football players. Bishop Blake, when he's become a friend of Foster the City and kind of a mentor to us, when he told us the story, he said that when these boys would come into their home, before they even walked through the door, he said we would stand out on the sidewalk, and I'd point to the front door, and I would tell these guys, hey, listen, when you walk through that front door, you're going to be grafted into our family. I'm going to love you, I'm going to provide for you, I'm going to care for you, I'm going to protect you as if you're my own flesh and blood. You are being grafted into our family. And then the boys would walk through the front door. And that was not just some sweet sentiment that Bishop Blake would say. That was something that was tried and tested time and time and time again. In small ways, in big ways, including the night when one of the boys was upstairs in his room, middle of the night, and he was playing with matches. And he accidentally set his curtains on fire. And within a matter of minutes, the entire Blake family was standing out on the sidewalk watching their house burn to the ground. Bishop Blake, when he told us this story, he said that as he was watching the house burned to ash. This is their home where they had raised their biological kids. They had countless prized possessions and memories in that home burning to the ground. He said all he could think about was his wife who was standing right next to him thinking, what is going through her head right now? Is she regretting saying yes to these boys? What is she thinking? But when the house had burnt to the ground, the last fire truck had driven off, Mary simply looked over at her husband and she said, well, we better get to the store. The boys have school in the morning. We got to get some school supplies. So he said at 2 a.m, they were walking up and down the aisles of Walmart buying school supplies and a change of clothes for the boys. But here's where it gets interesting. The boys didn't actually go to their classes the next day. They were so confident that once again social workers were going to show up to their school and say, you guys have another failed placement. I mean, surely they'd crossed the line. They burnt the house down, right? Surely they'd crossed the line. They were going to be kicked out of the home. And so they cut their classes and they hid. But it wasn't the social worker that went to go find these boys. It was Bishop Blake. He went and found them. They were hiding in the gymnasium. And he brought them back into the hotel where they were now staying. And they said, guys, I told you you were being grafted into our family. And then nothing was going to change that. And that night they had like an informal adoption ceremony in the hotel room. Isn't that incredible? The story doesn't end there, though. I told you he wasn't just an at-risk counselor, he was also a pastor at his congregation, this little church in Texas. And he had now come like face to face with the reality that there were kids like these boys that needed love and care and compassion. And he began to learn that there were more children entering into foster care than there were families ready to receive them, and it broke his heart. So one morning he stood in front of his congregation and he said, who will stand with us for the vulnerable? That was a question he asked them. He said, there are more kids like this that are entering into foster care than there are families ready to love them and to show them hospitality and generosity and compassion. Who will stand with us for the vulnerable? And then he said, a woman stood up in his church and she said, I will, Bishop. And then another woman stood up and she said, I will, Bishop. And then another one stood up. From their tiny little congregation, they raised up 15 new foster families. And within a matter of months, they had 39 children running through their halls in their congregation. 39 kids. And then what was happening in his little congregation began to spread word. Word was being spread around the area about what was happening. And other pastors said, hey, we want in. We want to be a part. Our churches want to be a part of this too. And so they began to link arms together, and they got to this place where there is a waiting list of families in the county rather than a waiting list of children in need of a home. And they've worked together year after year after year to make sure it stays that way. That's the pioneer. Those are the footsteps that we're following. We can see the same thing happen right here in the Bay Area. We're moving towards this day when one day there will be a waiting list of families rather than a waiting list of kids in need of a home across the Bay Area, and Berean Mission is on the front lines of helping that vision become a reality, and I want to honor you for that. Listen, I don't know most of you. I'm meeting you for the first time, and but here's the deal. I would put money on a bet that not one of you in this room, not one person in this room, as you were listening to me tell that story, we're thinking to yourself, wow, what a fool. What a fool this guy is to say yes to this. I mean, look at what it cost him. It cost him his house. What an idiot. I can't believe he said yes to that. Not one person in this room thought that. In fact, I think that for many of you, as you're hearing stories like that, you're thinking, man, that's inspiring. Man, that's a life well lived. Was that going through your mind? I want my life to tell a story like that. I know that's true of you. Because that's what you were made for, right? That's what I was made for. We were created in Christ Jesus for good works. We were blessed that we might be a blessing. Like God reached out his hands towards us when we were in need, and now we are just naturally compelled to do the same thing for those around us, right? And what I want to do today is I want to look together at a passage in Luke chapter 10. If you have a Bible with you, open to Luke 10. I want to look at a passage where Jesus is going to tell us the very same thing. I want to tell you a story that's pretty similar to the Blakes. Luke chapter 10, this is going to be a story that many of you are familiar with. We're going to start in verse 25 together. Give you just a quick second to get there. Luke 10:25. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "Well, what's written in the law?" Jesus replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You've answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do that, and you'll live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" So in reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, 'The one who had mercy on him.' Jesus told him, 'Go and do likewise.'" 3 things I want to pull out today. The first is Jesus gives us a very clear mandate here. It's really clear. It's really simple. We are to see and have compassion. To see and to move towards others with love and action. First thing Jesus says here is that a priest and a Levite come by and they see the man. Both of them, it says that they saw the man. But what they saw did not move them to action, did not move them to compassion. And we, of course, know this is heartbreaking that they actually went out of their way to avoid the man. This is extra heartbreaking because Jesus didn't just say a couple of guys walked by. He said a priest and a Levite. These are varsity level religious leaders. Better than anybody, they knew the scriptures. They had massive chunks of the scriptures committed to memory, committed to the heart. They knew better than anybody from the Old Testament scriptures God's heart for the vulnerable. And yet what they understood about God did not move them to reflect God. Their religion was an abstract, disembodied knowledge. That's all it was. Not something that was transforming them into people of love and action. I think of it like this. The Niners play today at 105. You excited? Are we excited? Niners fans? No? Okay. All right. We got to get back on track, guys. 1 and 2. I think today we're going to get back on track. We got to get healthy. Brandon and I just got to show up. We got to get back on track, and I think it's going to happen today. I'm very excited about the game. I love watching the Niners. I love watching the Niners in particular with my kids. I have 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. My 10-year-old in particular, I love watching with him because we can't make it past halftime without him actually wanting to go out and play the game. Like he's like, "Dad, can we go play catch? Dad, can we go out in the backyard and play football?" Like, because what he's been watching has so inspired him and compelled him, he has to go out and actually do it. Somewhere along the way, we lose that, don't we? As Niners fans. Like we get comfortable, we're just content sitting on the couch. We put the jerseys on as if we're actually a part of the team, right? And we learn the plays and the nuance, and we learn the players' names and the team drama and all the stats and the data, and we argue about it and critique it and judge it, right? That's what we do. We're those armchair quarterbacks, right? We're content to do that. We stop getting out there and playing it. And that's exactly what was true of this priest and this Levite, and God help us, may it not be true of us. They were so good at they wore the right clothes, they knew the right language, they knew the characters' names from the scriptures. They knew the doctrine. They could talk about it. They could argue about it. They could debate about it. They could critique it. But they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. They become, armchair Christians, if you will. Their abstract knowledge did not move them into concrete love or action. Martin Luther King Jr. said it like this. He said, "In the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard so many ministers say, those are social issues with which the gospel has no real concern. And I have watched so many churches commit themselves to a completely otherworldly religion, which makes a strange distinction between body and soul, the sacred and the secular. In other words, Jesus didn't just come to preach about the poor, or even to preach to the poor. He came to also lift up the poor. A disembodied, abstract faith is not found in the Bible. It's just not. Our faith is to be lived out on the grounds, in the street, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, not just something we sing about or talk about on a Sunday. Jason Johnson, he's an author and a pastor, he says, if this doesn't get us riled up, I don't know what will. He says, we cannot rightly raise our hands in worship of a God that steps towards us in our hard and broken, and then use those same hands to push the hard and broken of others away. So the question is, what do we do with what we see in front of us? Again, maybe it's just that buddy of yours that's struggling emotionally right now, dealing with some mental health issues. Maybe it's the neighbor who's struggling financially or whose marriage is falling apart. What will we do with what we see in front of us, those who are suffering or who are having a difficult time? What do we do with what we see in front of us in the foster care system? Again, right now here in the Bay Area, there are thousands of children in the foster care system. And if these kiddos are not placed into a loving, stable home where they can experience healing and attachment and love and hospitality, a third will end up spending time on the streets. Half will develop a substance addiction. More than half develop PTSD. Suicidal tendencies for kids in foster care are 4 times higher than their peers. More than 60% of the kids that they're rescuing from human trafficking domestically come from the foster care system. 3 out of 5 kids. Sometimes we hear numbers like that, and all it is just numbers, and it's just stats. But these aren't just stats, these are stories, aren't they? Like every number has a name. Every name has a story, and every story matters to God. I could give you example after example. Let me tell you about a couple of kids. Heard about a couple of kids recently, an 8-year-old little girl and a 3-year-old little boy. Brother and a sister, they had been living in a government facility for 9 months because they can't find a family for them. The 3-year-old little boy is so developmentally delayed that he has yet to walk. 3 years old. The 8-year-old little girl has had to be mom to her little brother for so long, the social workers tell us she doesn't play. She doesn't play with toys. She won't play on a playground at the park because her brain has been rewired to be caregiver rather than child. 8 years old. Who will take in this 3-year-old little boy and teach him how to walk? Who will bring in this 8-year-old little girl and teach her how to be a child, how to play? Just this last week, we got a social worker reached out to us and said that there's a 12-year-old little girl. My daughter's 12. There's a 12-year-old little girl here that has been abandoned, and they can't find a family for her. In her young life, she has already been pimped out sexually. She's already been exploited sexually at 12 years old, and they can't find a family for her. Nobody will take this girl in. It cannot be this way. It cannot be this way. We cannot become ambivalent to stories like this. We cannot become numb to what we see in front of us. We cannot call normal that which God is weeping over. We have to open our eyes and then move in compassion and action, just like God moved towards us when we were in need. And that's what we see the Good Samaritan do in this story that Jesus tells us. He moves towards the man in need. I want to take a minute, and I want us to look at the measure of his love. He does a couple things. First, what he does is he puts himself at risk. We all know, I think, just even in the context, if this is your first time hearing Luke 10, this is what's called a parable. It's not true. Right? So Jesus is telling a story to convey some important truths, but it's a fictional story. What's really interesting, though, in this is that when Jesus tells this parable, although it's fiction, he places it in an actual setting, an actual location that his listeners probably would have been familiar with. He says, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. That stretch of road was infamous. It was called the Bloody Way, or the path of blood, because it was really common for people to get jumped on that road, to get robbed. And so my guess is that for some of those listeners, they would have said, of course the priest and the Levite picked up their pace and moved fast, because if they didn't, maybe the robbers are still nearby. The guy's half dead, which means it probably just recently happened. The robbers are nearby. Maybe it's even an ambush. Of course they picked up their pace. That makes sense. Otherwise they might have been in danger. But could that be the point that Jesus is making? Could that be part of what he's trying to communicate? It is that I'm asking you to be willing, listen please, to inconvenience yourself, or even, if need be, put yourself in harm's way if that's what your neighbor needs. What if that's what Jesus is telling us? I am asking you to inconvenience yourself, or even put yourself in harm's way if that's what your neighbor needs. That is so counterintuitive to a culture like ours that so values self-preservation, isn't it? All right, when we see a need in front of us, again, whether it's just that buddy who's calling us, so you know they're struggling right now, and you think, man, if I pick up this phone, how long am I going to be on this phone call? Or it could be, a kid in foster care. When we see a need in front of us, we do a cost analysis. Almost all of us do this. I do this. And we say, gosh, if I move towards this need, what will this cost me? How will this impact my time, my resources, my sense of security or well-being? How will it impact my plans and my ambitions for my life? So we do this analysis. What will this cost me? And of course, we have to navigate this with people exploring foster care. They ask us all the time, okay, so if I say yes, what if the kid that comes into my home, misbehaves? Or, acts out of the trauma that they've experienced in their life? Isn't that hard? Or what if they come into our home and I don't know, they're with us for months, maybe even years, and I get attached. And I really just begin to love this child as if they're my own son, my own daughter. And then they go back home to their biological family eventually, doesn't that rip your heart out? Isn't that hard? And the answer, of course, is yes, it does. I don't have this in my notes. I'm going to share a quick story, though. The second little girl that we brought into our home, she was 7. Amazing little girl. One of my favorite memories is we took her to Yosemite. She'd never been camping. We took her to Yosemite, and I taught her how to ride a bike. I had a bike in the back of my truck, and we brought it out, and we surprised her, and I taught her how to ride a bike on the trails in Yosemite. I'll never forget that memory. I have it etched in my mind. I can see her riding her bike right in front of me. I had some amazing memories. And yet for that little girl, the 7 months that she was with us were some of the most difficult months we've ever had as a family. She had gone through quite a bit in her young life, and so she acted out of that. It was hard for her to process, so she acted out a lot, and that was one of the most turbulent, chaotic times. She ended up having to leave our home after 7 months. My wife and I felt like we had utterly failed this little girl. It was so hard. Such a hard season for my biological kids, for my wife, for me, and for her. We felt like we'd absolutely failed this little girl. And yet, walking through that season and saying yes even to the difficult seasons, let me tell you what God was able to do through that. When she was still in our home, there was a moment in time when there was a day we were dropping her off for a visit with her biological mom. Oftentimes in foster care, you want to keep the kids connected to their biological family. So we dropped, her name is Karina off for a visit with her mom, and the rest of my family was going to drive to a restaurant for 2 hours, go have dinner, and then come back and pick her up. So we go to the restaurant, come out, somebody had slashed our tires in the parking lot. And so we're like, shoot, we got to go get Karina. So we call a friend of ours, she's one of our support friends, and we say, Jean, Jean was also a social worker, so Jean, is there any way you could go pick up Karina from her visit with her mom? We're stuck here with flat tires. And she said, no problem. She drives down, picks up Karina, and when Jean gets there, she gets into a conversation with Karina's mom. Her mom's name is Tracy. Jean, our support friend, and Tracy, Karina's mom, get in this conversation, and a friendship sparks. So Karina goes on with her foster care journey. She ends up getting reunited back with her family. She's back with her family still today. But that friendship between Jean and Tracy continued from that point forward. And at one point, Jean asked Tracy, hey, why don't you and Karina and the rest of your family, why don't you guys come check out our church? As you guys are kind of rebuilding as a family, this is a great community where you can experience some love and support. And guys, Tracy said yes. And she came and started attending our church. For the last 6 years, she's been a part of our church community. A couple years into that, Tracy placed her faith in Jesus. We got to see her baptized on Easter Sunday. And then a couple years after that, I got a message from Tracy, Karina's mom, and she said, hey, Philip, guess what? Karina placed her faith in Jesus. And she's quoting scripture at me saying she needs to be baptized. And she's 12 at this point. And she says, would you be the one to be able to do that for her? And so I got the opportunity to baptize this little girl in our church. This scared, sad, lonely little girl who was struggling. I got to baptize her as my sister in Christ. This season that we thought was so unbelievably difficult, so challenging, we thought we had absolutely failed because of just how difficult it was. What God was able to birth out of that. My wife told me as we were getting in the car that day after baptizing Karina, she said, I feel like God gave us a little glimpse of heaven today. So she said. Jean, the support friend of ours, she came up to my wife and me and she said, if somebody were to hand me $1 million right now in this moment, I would not be any happier than I am right now. I'm kind of butchering that phrase, but you get the sentiment. What it was, it's James 1. I got to get back on track here, but really quickly. James 1, right? We know that passage where it says that religion that God sees as pure and faultless is this, to care for orphans and widows in their distress. Well, just a couple verses away from that, James says, if you're not just a hearer of the word, like these priests and Levite were, like not just a hearer of the word, but you're a doer of the word, you will be blessed in your doing. That's what Jean was talking about. If somebody were to walk up to me right now and just hand me $1 million, I wouldn't be any happier than I am right now in this moment. That's blessing. That's blessing. That's what we're being called into. Yes, it's hard. Okay, yes, it's not easy, but surely your life, my life was meant to be more than just about getting to the finish line as safely and comfortably as possible. Your life was meant for more than that. So was mine. I went way off track. I'm sorry, guys. The Samaritan put himself in harm's way. He paid the cost. And then he gave of his own resources. He took what he had. He took his wine and his oil, Jesus says. He took his wine and his oil, and he would have used that to clean and to disinfect the wounds. And then he bound the man's broken body, placed it on his own donkey, took him to an inn. And then he pulled out his wallet. He gave 2 denarii. That's 2 months' rent, by the way. It's not chump change. He took out 2 denarii and gave it to the innkeeper to make sure the man had all the time and the resources that he needed to recover. That's the kind of compassion and the generosity that God is inviting us into. I want to share a quick story with you about a family who did just that, who opened up their life with generosity and compassion. Go ahead and watch this video here. This is a story of my friend Ryan.
To tell you the story of how my wife led our family into foster care. Growing up, I had no aspirations to be an adoptive dad or a foster parent. To tell you the truth, I didn't even know what foster care was. My wife, on the other hand, had decided that she was going to adopt a child before she entered middle school. I still remember the day that she came to me and she asked me, "What do you think about becoming foster parents?" At first, I was very hesitant about the idea. I was not interested in signing up right away to welcome children into our life from hard places. And I think one of the main reasons is I couldn't wrap my head around the concept of pouring myself out for a child only to have them leave our home. Yet after a while and her persistence, I agreed to go to an orientation to learn more about what fostering was all about. And I remember at the orientation, they shared stories and statistics of kids who were in care. Some of those statistics really cut straight to my heart. Shortly after, we found out about a 23-year-old who needed a place to stay. And my wife, yet again, convinced me that we should open up our home to this young man. As we heard his story and got to know him, we found out some heartbreaking details about his journey into foster care. When he was 14 years old, he was part of this horrific event that resulted in his entire family dying except for him. He was the only one who survived. And that event led him to enter into foster care. And the thing about his story that made me the most angry, that broke my heart the most, is that this boy at 14 years old After going through one of the worst things I can imagine, being in foster care, there was no family available to take care of him. He ended up staying in a group home for his entire adolescence. I remember one day sitting with him. We were actually driving in the car. I know exactly the street we were on, and I asked him about why he played so many video games. And I'll never forget his answer. He said, "Well, I don't really like this world. And when I play video games, I'm taken to a place where nobody can hurt me." Hearing those words in that moment, all of my hesitation about becoming a foster parent melted away, and I was left sitting with a little boy who needed a home. The truth is, I'm not alone in my hesitation to become a foster dad. Many husbands are hesitant to follow their wives' calling to foster children. Addressing this issue, author and foster parent Jason Johnson says this: "Some will say it's important that both the husband and wife feel called, and I would wholeheartedly agree. That is, after all, the point. Perhaps God is making that call very clear to you through your wife." The truth is that there are many husbands who are hesitant to follow their wives leading into foster care. And this is really tragic because the need for godly men to step into these children's lives is massive. One national study found that 46% of children involved in the foster care system had not seen their fathers in the last year. Yet study after study suggests that children with involved, loving fathers are significantly more likely to do well in school, to have healthy self-esteem, to exhibit empathy, even to avoid high-risk behaviors like drug use and criminal activity. Foster dads have a unique opportunity to be present and committed to children who need fathering. And in doing so, they can make a significant difference in that child's life. Most of the children I've fostered have moved on from my home, but I am so grateful that at such a crucial and vulnerable time in their life, God allowed me to play a role in making sure that these children knew how much God loved them. To find out how you can make a difference in a child's life, head to fosterthecity.org and sign up to attend an interest meeting today.
To whom is God calling you to invest? Again, maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a family member who's going through a hard time. Maybe it's that neighbor, again, whose marriage is falling apart. Maybe it is a child in foster care. If you do have some love to give, maybe it's considering what it might look like for you to become a foster parent. Would you be willing to just to take a little bit of time and explore what that might look like? For others of you, maybe you've got time to give, and maybe that's you becoming a support friend for a foster parent. Foster the City's model is we help churches raise up foster families and support friend teams for foster parents. These support friends provide consistent, practical, emotional, spiritual support to a family to help them foster longer and better. So maybe that support friend role is a role that God's calling you to. If you are interested in learning more about how you can get involved with Foster City, there is a table out in the courtyard. I'd love for you to just come out and fill out a next step card. I promise you, if you fill out that next step card, we're not going to drop a foster kid off to your house tomorrow. I promise. All we're going to do is we're going to send you an email this week. And that email is going to tell you about some interest meetings. Pastor Aaron mentioned we've got one coming up right here. If you happen to be out of town or unable to make that specific date, we have other ones available over Zoom that you can jump into as well. Really, the challenge for you is, would you be willing to give about 1 hour of your time? Would you give 1 hour to simply learn what it might look like for you to play a role in the life of a vulnerable child in San Mateo County or beyond? I want to close with one more point. I know I'm probably up against it on time. I'll try to make this quick, but listen, if I stop here, if we just stop here, we've talked about the mandate, we talked about the measure of love to which he's called us. If we just stop there, all that I will have managed to do up until this point is to put a burden on your shoulders that is too heavy for any of us to bear. This is confession time again. When I read through Luke 10 over the years, this story has not inspired me or motivated me to go out and live a life of compassion. It's not. It's felt crushing to me. Who can do what Jesus is asking here? Who of us can do this? It's only recently as I've been studying this passage that I'm realizing that perhaps my understanding of this parable has been limited. It's been incomplete. And God's been kind of showing me another piece to the puzzle of this story. Listen, and I know it's getting late. We're excited about the Niners game. Stay with me. Can you lean in for like 3 minutes? Put your thinking caps on here for just a minute. The key to understanding this parable is where the Jewish man is placed in the story. Hang with me. If Jesus would have placed the Jewish man on the donkey and the Samaritan man on the ground, that would have made way more sense, especially in light of the question that prompted the story. If you remember, go back. Jesus told this parable in response to this Jewish expert in the law who said, basically, who is the neighbor that I have to love in order to be saved? Who is the neighbor I have to love in order to be saved? If Jesus would have responded, okay, imagine you are going down the road on your donkey and you see a Samaritan man on the ground. These Samaritans that you find, despicable, you look down on them, you see them as subhuman, they're your enemies. As you're going down the road, you see a Samaritan man on the ground, even that's your neighbor. I want you to get down, I don't want you to keep your distance. I want you to get down in the dirt with him. I want you to love him. I want you to show him compassion. Use your resources, care for him. Even your Samaritan neighbor is the person you need to love. If he would have said that, that would have made a lot of sense. But he didn't do that. He flipped it upside down, didn't he? He turned it upside down. Why? Why would he do that? Stay with me. You with me still? Jesus, I think, is saying this. Do you really want to know how to be saved? Do you really want to know how to be saved? If you want to know how to be saved, you have to see that you are the man on the ground. You are the man on the ground. You have to see just how helpless and in need you are, and that you need a man that you once considered to be an enemy to come towards you and to get down in the dirt with you. The expert of the law had been trying his whole life to be able to justify himself before God, to be able to earn his way to God based on his own accomplishments and merits. And I don't know about you, I so resonate with this. This is the trap that I so easily fall into. Am I good enough yet, God? Have I helped enough churches? Have I helped enough kids in foster care? Have I managed my sin well enough today? Am I accepted by you, God, today? I so easily fall into this trap. There's actually a prayer that I pray every single morning. It's part of my kind of morning rhythm. And a couple of the lines in that prayer, I say, God, help me to live today as a beloved child of God. Help me to live with confidence today, knowing there is no mistake that I can make that will cause you to love me less. And help me to live with humility, knowing there is no accomplishment that will make you love me more. I pray that prayer every single morning, because every morning I wake up with this bent that I need to work my way back to God. But friends, listen to me. Jesus is not saying to me, nor to you, nor is he saying to this man, if you want to be saved, you must become the Good Samaritan. I think what he's saying is, if you want to know how to be saved, you have to see that I am the Good Samaritan. Jesus is the Good Samaritan. He's saying, I'm painting you a picture. I see you in your need. You're helpless. You're beaten up. You're bloodied. You're broken. And I know, like, when all hope seems lost, here I come and I see you. And I'm not going to keep my distance from you. I'm actually going to get down in the dirt with you, not just at the potential that I might be putting myself in a harm's way, knowing it's going to cost me my very life. I'm coming towards you, and I'm coming with my wine and with my oil, in other words, with my blood and my spirit, and I'm going to make you whole. I'm going to cleanse you. I want to bring you back to life. Jesus, friends, is our Good Samaritan. You and I could never become a Good Samaritan until we first see that we need a Good Samaritan. But when we get this, when we embrace this, now when we see others now in front of us who are struggling and who are hurting and who are in need, we can't look down on them anymore. We can't judge them anymore. We can't be ambivalent or uncaring to their stories anymore. We can't be numb to them because we look at them and say, oh my gosh, I'm looking in a mirror. I'm looking in a mirror, that's me, that's my story too. It's only when we see Jesus as our Good Samaritan that we can, bit by bit, become like our Good Samaritan. And close with this. This is the invitation. When I read stories like this, I'll oftentimes, maybe you do this too, I kind of put myself in the story. I kind of think, who do I resonate with? Like, so Jesus is talking with his disciples. Do I feel like, oh yeah, I'm like Peter in that? Or I'm like, or in a parable, I'll try to think, who do I resonate with in this season of my life? I told you, I see Jesus as the Good Samaritan now when I read this story. It lights me up. And then at one point, I was the man on the ground, but he's lifted me up. I'm not down there anymore. Do you know who I resonate the most with now in this story? The innkeeper. Because now, in this season of my life, Jesus is bringing people to me that he's asking me to care for, people in need. And just like the Good Samaritan, he's with the 2 denarii, he's giving me all the resources that I need to care well for those with whom he's entrusted me. And just like the Good Samaritan as well, one day Jesus is going to come back. And I'm going to have to give an account for how I cared for those with whom he's put in my path. And I think the same is true for you. I've never had 6 high school football players living in my home. I've never had my house burned all the way to the ground. But I am going to follow in the footsteps of Bishop Blake. And I'm just going to ask that same question. Who will stand with us for the vulnerable? Again, maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a kid in foster care. Who will stand with us for the vulnerable? Would you close your eyes and bow your heads with me? In a moment, I'm going to pray, just with your eyes closed, your heads bowed. Let me also just say this. Maybe it's not the innkeeper that you resonate with. Maybe it actually is the man on the ground. On this day, you do feel beaten and bloodied and broken and vulnerable, and honestly, things feel a little bit helpless. If that's you today, can I ask you to do something for me? Just with every head bowed, every eye closed, would you do something for me? Can you imagine the scene on that road with me? Just in your mind, would you just, with your imagination, would you imagine that scene? And if you really resonate with that man who has been hurt and broken and vulnerable, would you just imagine yourself in his place right now, on the ground? You're hurting and you're struggling. You're scared, feeling alone. And just even with your imagination, if you would you just see that Good Samaritan coming towards you? And I just want you to imagine for a moment, if you would, just that Good Samaritan getting down off that donkey and coming towards you in the dirt. He's come with his wine and his oil, and he's come to make you whole again. Just if you would, in this moment, would you just imagine, how is he looking at you? How is the Good Samaritan looking at you right now in your need? Jesus, we thank you for being our Good Samaritan that did not keep his distance from us. Thank you for coming towards us in our need. When we were hurting and things felt helpless, we know that you came towards us and you laid down your life to make us whole, to bring us back into family. We thank you, we praise you, we give you all the glory. God, as we fix our eyes on you and on your mercy and your compassion towards us, I pray, God, that you would help us to be more and more begin to reflect you into the lives of the needy around us. We do this not out of a sense of obligation or a sense of justification before you. We do it out of an act of worship and out of gratitude, God, for the way that you've moved toward us. God, for every person in this room today, I pray for clarity and for courage. God, give us clarity to know whom you are calling us to move towards. Again, give us a name or give us a picture of somebody that you're calling us to reach out to and to provide encouragement and support and compassion, generosity maybe. God, maybe it's, and again, not just with the clarity, I also pray for the courage. God, it's costly and it's hard to show compassion. And so would you give us the courage to follow you one step at a time? We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Let's rise as we respond.